I figured the easiest way to do this would be to just run a commentary. I was going to put music, whatever. That is a block of clay. It's important to make sure that that bag stays that way so it doesn't fall down when you're going to slice it. This magnets gives you a lot of different, oops, drop that shit in the water. Gives you a lot of different widths that you could cut for the size of pot that you want to rock. Wire tool lit up. Clean that string off. Sometimes it'll stick on the thing. You got to make sure that it is either sticking to the board or the thing. Just flip it back over off it if it sticks to it, but be careful it doesn't drop halfway through you're pulling that block off. This is the best way I learned to spread that slab out. It said you get less cracks, and it's really fast to get it into a large enough slab. The fastest way possible. Ancient Chinese techniques. Always even. Do it the same amount of times on each. Sometimes you gotta let it land harder on one side in case it gets like out of square. This technique drag out them thicker sides better. Stick up. It's I think 6 millimeter. I think 5/16 inches. I think. Rolling from the center to the edge tends to be the best way, but the most important thing is that you're rolling it out so you don't end up having to do this, cutting off your edges. But if you do, wet it up, put it in that gap where your inlet is. Try to keep it as rectangle as possible. No waste. Little waste. Thumbs up, bro. Yeah, it's a karate move, yeah. It's important that you pay attention to which direction you're rolling these into. You want that air out. But like this, I need to push that out to the edge. So it's got to go out that way. Usually it doesn't stick to the thing. If it does, you just go back across it the other way. And it'll flatten it back out and roll that air and water out there. But again, these boards, this 1/2 inch hardy backer, really keeps everything even. It's just enough texture to keep air in between, not like drywall or plaster where it's so flat that it sticks and sticks. These give you enough flatness to rib out the little bit of texture easily, and it'll never really stick. Sometimes it sticks if you don't clean your board enough, it'll stick. If it's really wet, of course it'll stick. Compressing this outside edge is not a bad idea. You're gonna end up cutting all that excess edge off anyway, but it's gonna compress what's gonna end up being your edge, which is always a good thing because you're not cracking. Please, no cracking. Everything in arm's reach saves mad time. It's important to keep everything within arm's reach. I finally got my water bucket right, like right below where the camera is, and a towel. I used to be walking up to get a towel to dry, and it's stupid. Just one spot, one spot. All right, now this is where you see we're gonna always the same direction. Every one of these I've seen people going sideways, this, that, back and forth, but then you're creating a thing where it's going to want to curl up in that direction. If you go any direction you're going, it's going to want to curl up in that direction. That's why you go straight down, flip it straight down, flip it straight down, and then or turn it rather, and then flip it and do the exact same thing on the other side. This way it doesn't want to curl. This is people call it smoothing ribbon. What you're really doing is arranging those outside clay particles. You're flattening them out. It makes it stronger. But also when you're shrinking, if you only do it in one direction, being that you compacted only that side is going to shrink more. That's why it curls up on you. So as long as you do both sides evenly, it's not going to curl as bad. Porcelain stuff with a little bit of grog is going to curl up anyway. It tends to help actually in the end because it pulls up kind of even, and it gives you just that slight bow. Depending on how you dry, you can put that slight bow up so it sags back down, or if you do it drying regular or upside down, just utilize that bow to your best advantage if you do end up with one. But the idea is to get rid of it on the first place. At this point is now when you're using another board to flip it without hands. This is when it starts to matter that you don't want to put that memory. I hate that concept of memory. The clay doesn't have a memory. If it does, you are teaching it. So don't give it a bad memory. Yeah, give it a good memory. But after your one ribbon, definitely flip it in between two boards. Keep it flat. Even swipes, as even as possible. I got one board that leaves like a little channel in this because it's like, I don't know if it's slightly warped or just slightly bent. It leaves like a little channel, but usually you just come across the other way and it'll take it out, and it doesn't change the thickness enough to really bother anything. It's another thing with that stoneware to make sure that you really have the angle of that rib towards you, as opposed to the porcelain, which we might get into, where I hold it in the other direction so its top's pointing away from you. For some reason it works better. Keep it clean. See that bin there? That's where all the scraps go. Again, within arm shot. Keep it clean. And then I always start on this wider side because it ends up making for less waste. Cut that off. And then sometimes these scraps I'll use if they're still wet enough. And if you're waiting for the rest of the slab to dry, I'll take all these little scraps and make a hand-built round out of it. And, the time it takes for that thing to dry. And then it's a nice little space filler in the kiln. I gotta get different size rulers. That thickness always depends, varies the width of the wall. Now here's important, watch this. You gotta do that rock on, man. You gotta hit it, because if it's off edge, it's gonna be off. So always rock on as even as possible. Squeeze it to make sure it's flush. Get that ruler right. And then don't worry about holding down the angle, but hold down that ruler. Hold down that ruler. Another best thing about these boards is you could cut on them like this all day, and they're not gonna fucking, oops, they're not gonna pull up nothing. It'll leave me little gouges that go away, but it ain't gonna start tearing it apart like it's gonna with plaster or with drywall. Rock on, squeeze it, push that thing up. Oops, wrong space. Try again. Get that ruler set and then hold that ruler solid. Again, different width rulers here for different size walls. Simplest way to get your wall width, or wall height rather. Just right off your instant edge and then the other. See that black ruler there's a little thicker. Sometimes I'll use a slat for like a shallow Zelkova type tray. Drainage parts for drainage parts. Trying to get this down to eyeballing. I had one dead center the other day. Usually it's a couple millimeters that I gotta move it, but trying to dead eye, always practice that dead eye work. Saves mad time. That gets pushed out, and then sometimes I'll use these for feet parts. Most of the time, or depending on whatever foot I use, this will be saved for little props just as it's drying. Which usually by the time I'm building, it's dry enough to not sag anymore anyhow. But those are still good. I'll put one along the long side of the rectangle, and then two in the underneath the drain hole on the inside. Because once it shrinks, them outside ones ain't holding it no more anyway. But those inside ones will keep that middle from falling better because it's going to shrink into it, if you know what I mean. As soon as I get past about 4 or 5 inches to the edge from that thing, I'll put these Oregon holes, just a little extra drainage just in case the pot doesn't sag right. But I've been killing that pot sagging perfect, just enough to let that water drain. And you not really need them end holes, but they're nice to have anyway, and it kind of looks nice. That's you know what, that must be 5/16 slab because these holes are 3/16. That's a 3/16 bit. I haven't sharpened it in forever. I don't think I'll ever have to. It works pretty well, and always against the board so you're not pushing, breaking through anything, especially that drain hole. Cutting them in the air don't make no sense to me. All that's dead-eyed. Perfection takes too much time for the variance that you'll get. Tolerance is tight. This is that first bevel with the little rounded edge trimming tool. Just a little bit. If it's like right now, it's kind of wet, so I'll just give it a 1-2. Sometimes when it's drier, go up to like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 wiggles. Little measuring cup to compress that down and keep I don't really like to have a lip on those, so the water could exit out those holes pretty freely too. Round out again. This brush end is getting thin. Brush end wore out real fast with the grog. I'm gonna have to find a new tapered hole pusher soon. It's kind of a pain to get something that works right. I don't like wiggling it around. Then it takes it kind of out of round, bevel it up again. This way you're beveling, compressing, so you got like an internal bevel, bevel it again, 2, 3 times as strong. This is why you could put pliers on a piece of copper and just yoink it out the bottom, and you're never really gonna have to worry about it cracking. Once they get stuck like this and you don't want to, it's got to be free, those sticks will help you keep everything straight and keep it from sticking before you flip it again. You don't want to be fingering up a side there because you're going to end up with a warp. Same thing on the bottom, except different mannerism, rather different timing. This push through first, so you got that little bit of excess clay to re-support the sides, fix that little gap that you have in there due to the taper. And then because this side is usually drier, you could take, it's just different. When it's drier like this, see, I'll be able to give it a little bit more on this. And then I really won't have to compress it in again. Plus this is going to be the bottom. So it's alright if it has that little lip edge. It's always different though, but never any less than like bevel, compress, compress, compress. Keep that strong. Compressing this inside hold in, that puts a 45 on that. Every edge is strength. So there's 1, 2 edges where there was one, and then I'm going to flip it and put the same bevel on the top side, beveling this outside. This is really just to keep the edges from being sharp, but you know, compression again, it's going to help keep these edges a little straighter. Flip. This is probably winding down part 1 because it cuts out just as I start cutting these corners out. And then there's some important stuff about the relationship between how you're going to cut out the, I'll show you right now, the angle of the sidewall. I think we're going to make it this angle. The angle that you choose is important, and it's going to relate to how you cut off the entire wall. If it's like an 1/8 inch there, you want such a bevel when you're cutting off the wall. If you make like a 1/4 inch here and then cut your wall all the way off with no angle at all, it's not going to sit right, and you're going to end up with a separation crack either on the inside or the outside of that connection point. So it takes a little while to get used to the angle there, and then the angle right here at which you're going to hold this blade when you cut this off. Too much bevel and you're going to have a separation crack on the outside. Too little bevel and you can end up with a separation crack on the inside. Different clays matter. Some clays will mash down into itself better than others. Since this is stiff and rather dry when you're working with it, you kind of have to have this one as close to even as possible. That angle, this angle matters. Oh yeah, this one gets all the way through the cutting off. I always cut out the long sides first and then do these sides. It just makes everything more even. I really don't even like that drag of the knife goes from one side to the other. I'd rather have something come straight down like those corners were cut off. Because this drag, it's going to compress it in one direction. That's going to make for a little bit of that shrink difference where it might turn you wavy. That's my angle tool, and this is where it ends. I'm gonna start a new pot and get these next ones.